Welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm going to do a presentation on Chapter 3 coming out of the Jing Gui Yao Lue, which is a almost 2,000-year-old textbook that came out of ancient China, a medical text. I'm going to be discussing Chapter 3. So this will be a storytelling, a teaching, and my perspectives. Chapter 3, the lily, the fox, and their story of their expression. Looking at a manifestation in the journey of spirit. These are three characters. Like all good stories, this chapter 3, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has three characters or three parts to the story. The first being the lily bulb, Baihe, and we have the fox, the wandering fox. And then we have the third aspect of chapter 3, which is Du, which is the toxic expression of yin and yang, depending on which way that this disease expresses ourselves. So we have the lily, the wandering fox, and finishing with the toxic expression. And this chapter talks about the symptoms and signs and how to treat it and what it actually means and what it represents. So I'll tell the story. Over on the right, you'll see the symbols for each disease, which are very beautiful. But first, I'll tell the story. The lily bulb, Baihe, 100 union disease. In the beginning, you have great dreams in your mind and ideas you want to experience and bring into the world. Yet just the idea and thinking about them is extremely daunting. You are afraid to take your first step on a 10,000 step journey. This is the beginning. Next comes the wandering fox, the middle stage of the disease progression. You, the fox, wants to wander far out into the world all by yourself. You want to follow your senses and emotions. You want to express and explore the world containing your deepest feelings. Further into the yin-yang du and the unexpressed expression. The growing lily bulb and the dreaming fox have been suppressed. They have been trapped inside a small box, growing tightly into its corners and walls. There is little to no room to express. There is suffocation because of fright. Disease is chosen to represent the expression of your disease. And briefly looking at the symbols, whenever I'm looking at herbology, I look at them the way that I've been taught by my teachers. And that's to look at everything like they're plants and seeds and growing. And just our first example, first picture for the lily bulb. It's beautiful because it represents 100 and it represents time. And we have a mouth and we have the little house. So things are now beginning to enter the temple, which is our body. The next one is unique perspective because you see the fox and you see the confusion. And the fox has really long roots, and is not fully constrained yet. And this symbol over here is beautiful because it shows indecision, but it also has the mouth representing the stomach. We have the heart, which is just below the stomach or the mouth, which is separated. And then we have, things trying to shoot up, but they still have deep roots that are unexpressed. And the last symbol for Du is possibly my favorite. Because you have like the Dantian field symbol. You have a field symbol, but you also have a similar symbol to mother. So you have two things growing inside you at the same time. And this up here is showing its full expression. So you have a poison growing inside of you that's growing alongside with yourself that is now becoming expressed. It's absolutely gorgeous. So something that this chapter 3 does, it highlights it. It acknowledges the progression of disease. Because as we go from the lily bulb to the fox to the yin yang du, the last expression, things are becoming more exterior to more deeply interior, and they're also quite like a lot changing from not very severe to much more severe. And it all begins with an opportunity to change, which we call wind, followed by a person acknowledging and seeing their emotions and passions, giving birth to it inside of themselves, giving space. Next, with the fox, you see the suppressed expression on deeper levels. And with the yin yang du, we see the diseased expression following this chronology progression. So what we see is what is created and is not expressed must find a way to become expressed, even if it must be manifested with the disease as the vehicle of expression. Because when you start dreaming, you create a space for something. And if you don't fill that space with a direct manifestation, then something else will fill that space. And spoiler alert, what's going to fill that space that you created will be explained further in this presentation. And just a couple examples of what will turn into a toxic yin expression and what will turn into a toxic yang expression. So an example of what will create a toxic yin expression could be a little kid when he's young killing a bird in his backyard. He feels guilty about it and he doesn't tell anyone. This is an example of suppressing a cold energy like guilt. And the opposite is creating a suppressed yang expression. So this is another version of a young girl who sees the circus and she becomes really excited about the circus and she wants to join the circus. But she ends up suppressing her own dreams in excitement because society tells her that it's crazy to join the circus, but all her heart and dreams want to join the circus. So this is suppressing a hot energy, suppressing excitement within the self. That's how the last stages of expressions can manifest different symptoms and signs. And briefly, because this is all about formulas, I want to briefly just show the charts that I put together because they are kind of beautiful. But the main ingredient in all these formulas is Baiha, which is the lily bulb. So as we see when we're in the lily bulb disease pattern, it's not as a severe of a disease. It's relatively still exterior with a little bit of interior, with such things as yin deficiency with heat affecting the heart and lung, yin fluid damage and stomach disharmony resulting from improper purgation like pooping, peeing, and sweating. Diseases with predominant thirst, yin deficiency, and exuberant heat damaging the fluids. We'll see as we move into fox, the patterns get more complex and more intense and more hot. We see damp heat brewing internally with an upright qi deficiency, meaning your exterior is not intact quite very well. Heat toxins brewing and binding in the blood. We have static damp heat toxins, and we have static damp heat toxins in the liver channel. So what we see obstructions are, when we get to the wandering fox part of the disease progression, is we see things affecting the throat, and we see things affecting the genitals. Two huge aspects of creation in the human body. We express things with our throat whenever we vocalize them and say what we mean. And also, our genitals are a huge part of creativity because they can create new life. They can create whole new people. So the genitals, when they're unexpressed and that creativity is unexpressed, it will generate heat because you're not really expressing yourself the way that you intended to when you first started thinking about something. And next is the yin-yang toxic expression disease pattern. So as we see, now things have gone from slightly bad to worse. And things are getting very hot. And now you actually see toxic expressions within the body. that can be more cold toxic expressions or more hot toxic expressions, like blood aspect of static heat, internal heat scorching the throat, and static blood and toxin binding in the throat. So again, the person's not able to speak their truth, and they have blood manifesting instead. So the formulas are really important, and it highlights in chapter 3 how many things you can cure with the lily bulb in basic formulas. And a neat fact, the lily bulb needs a cold cycle. It needs a frost to get it to germinate, to get it to grow. And it's also a cousin to the water lily, which is a spiritual plant. Okay, so now we get to the dirt and the nuts and seeds and the exciting part. So we're going to put some pieces together. So providing space for the evolution of life. We're looking at the chain of evolution and how things grow. So within our body, first we can let in viruses, which are not alive, and they consist of a segment of nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, which is surrounded by a protein coat. And I'll explain these in Chinese medical terms coming up. Next stage of the pyramid of evolution, we have bacteria, which are now alive, and the bacteria are small single-cell organisms now. So now we got single-cell organisms when we get to the level of bacteria in our body. Fungi are alive. So things like yeast, and yeast are round to long cells that reproduce vegetatively by budding or germinate to produce mycelium. Now this is important because if you see yourself like a garden, you're now creating soil. The yeast is a fungus that is creating a mycelial network, which is creating soil for plants and more bacteria to grow. And after the fungi, we can introduce the parasites and the worms. And parasites are single to complex multicellular organisms. And they have parasitism, which is a close relationship between species, which is you and the worm. And the worms are living in the soil. So now that the fungi produce soil, the worms, from the damp heat, I'll explain later, but the worms will continue to eat that soil and produce just fertile land for even more viruses, more bacteria, more fungi, and more parasites and worms to grow. So you can keep growing things inside your body. Because this all started with the idea that you wanted to grow something. The next on the chain, which is not necessarily evolved from parasites, but it's the more complex version of what is growing inside of you. Example is cancer. So with cancer, we see cells dividing, trying to form a multicellular, multi-organized being. Cancer in itself is trying to form a new human. There's aspects of perspective that are in complete isolation from each other. There's a complete divide. There is no longer communication with these aspects. The cancer thinks that it has to rebuild the hologram of the individual. So everyone knows cancer cells are some of the weakest cells inside the human body. They can die very easily. The cancer cells are trying with extremely low cellular voltage to rebuild you. They don't know that the outside world exists. So with the measly scraps they have, they're trying to rebuild a whole new human. Because they don't know you're already alive. In looking at this chain in evolution in Chinese medicine, when you put it to a 12-channel continuum point of view, or a Shanghan Lun point of view, viruses are like wind cold. Bacteria, heat. Fungus, damp heat. Parasites are chronic damp heat with some fuel. And cancer is chronic damp heat in isolation. So this is actually something that scientifically, you can just type it into Google and figure out for yourself. But viruses spread better in a cold environment. They're able to replicate in cold. And they take advantage of that. Bacteria, and also viruses are generally airborne. So they spread through the air, which first goes into our lungs, our first channel. Bacteria needs a heated environment to multiply and to increase its metabolism. Fungus, chronic damp heat. You see chronic damp heat really as a low-grade fever that's chronic. You have that from constantly fighting the bacteria. You then invite spores to grow from a weakened immune system. You just let them in. You invite them into your body. Following parasites, fungi creates the soil network for multicellular growth, which also thrives in chronic damp heat. So now you've created the soil for growth to invite more diseases into the body and more expressions of other cellular activity. And cancer is a multicellular organism in isolation, trying to form complexity. It rages inside your body as fire toxin, which generates the dryness and deficiency patterns. It just burns all your resources because it's trying to build something in isolation. So just going back to the fundamentals of Chinese medicine, the simple ideas of hollowness and fullness. What happens when you have hollowness inside of you? You give space for new creations to grow. Every time you dream, you manifest space inside of you. You create bubbles of reality. You create growth, just like a womb, just like darkness. The larger this hollowness grows, if you do not fill it, or you do not let go of it, organisms will fill it. They will fill that space that you provided yourself to grow something in this reality. Organisms will grow in complexity over time. We can see the evolution of disease as physical evolution. So cellular, multicellular. Again, here's just a brief overview. Viruses are like wind cold. Bacteria transform into heat. Fungi, which creates soil, creates chronic damp heat, or begins with chronic damp heat. Parasites fertilize that soil, creating chronic damp heat. And cancer is a fire toxin. And cancer is trying to reduce a human, which is an animal. So once we're at cancer, we're trying to reproduce a whole new human in isolation inside the human body, which can be seen as a parasite, but it's actually just a reproduction of ourselves, because there's aspects of our body, mind, and soul that are in complete isolation from each other. And that's what cancer is. So hollowness is providing space for growth, regardless of its expression. So growth can be you getting a new job, or starting to work out, or creating art or song or music, or playing baseball. But growth can also be the growth of cellular complexity within your body that you invite in. So you have a yin-yang toxic expression because you have suppressed your emotion and now have manifested it as a disease. Or will you choose to nurture your dreams? You are the lily and the fox. Thank you.